Thank you for the introduction and welcome everybody. I think it's great that there are so many faces interested in bike sharing, and just if everybody of us would use the bicycle for its daily commute, maybe for a lunch break or so, we have similar stats on volume like New York City. So I can encourage you only to take it up and support the scheme. Now I was asked to bring a little bit of international experience into this room here by just showcasing a few sample projects we have implemented in different countries, and so I'm focusing on this, and if there are any questions to start, I will make a couple of breaks in between so that we don't jump over the whole topics too much, so please ask your questions then. So first of all, a quick introduction of our company. Like Julian has mentioned already, we've been founded in 2014, or 2004, yes, sorry. It was a startup, 2 people with a big vision, much more vision than money they had, so it was a little bit difficult at the time, especially where there was no market for bike sharing. I mean, we were talking to cities, they said, what? Who are you? What are you doing? Sorry. So it took a while for us to also get a little bit of footprint. But as you see, we've been able to develop quite a few cities in the world. Now we're currently, together with our partners like Nextbike New Zealand, we're operating in more than 120 cities from all sizes, like little pilots like here in Christchurch, up to our flagship project, which is actually launching today on the 5th of May in Berlin. So we're going to have 5,500 bikes there. It's starting with about 2,000 bikes today. So we're very excited about this, and I'm waiting to hear until the sunset is coming in Germany to get the first Twitter and Facebook impressions from this. So if you're interested, stay tuned. Yeah, why bike sharing is booming? It started very slow, so bike sharing is a pretty recent phenomena. No? So the first, what we call third generation bike share, before it was very manual and very half-baked, but the first third generation approach, which uses ICT technology, was implemented in La Rochelle in 2002. So since then it has picked up, and now we see more than 1,200 cities in the world as of end of 2016 with operating bike sharing systems. And
Seb, can I just jump in there for a second? So those of us that have been dealing with bike share for a number of years or read around it will understand the term first generation bike share, second generation bike share, third generation and fourth generation. So first generation, there were bikes dipped in white paint and put on the street, and that was the extent of it. Mm-hmm. Gloriously simple on one level. Those bikes disappeared, you know. I don't think why. Second generation had some means of securing or security. So you think of the old style of shopping trolleys where you had to put in a 5-cent or a 10-cent piece, and there you go. Those bikes had a much more uniform appearance, but again, it's really just a few cents deposit, and you've got yourself a couple $100 worth of bike, and away you go. Third generation starts to have some technology somewhere in the system to control bikes, either on the bikes themselves or in the racks.
Yeah, thanks for clarification. Sometimes my viewers, of course, a little bit. Since then, some of the benchmarks internationally, you've probably come across the Velib project in Paris, 23,000 bicycles, which was launched by JCDecaux, the outdoor advertisement company, back in 2007. Other big schemes involve New York City, London, Barcelona. So basically you won't find any major city these days without a bike sharing system anymore. And Yeah, why is this? It offers it ticks a lot of boxes basically. It's very practical, covering the first mile, last mile in the city center. It gives you health benefits like cycling is giving in general. It's very flexible. You can have this one-way rentals, and also it adds a lot of positive attributes to a city. And finally, it's an environmentally friendly way of commuting or way of moving around. So I think we can break up the last 15 years of bike sharing into 4 different phases. So the first years, let me stick this. So the first years it was basically a try and error approach. Like with every disruptive and new technology, you just need to find out how it actually can be applied and to serve the objectives of the communities. And there were, of course, a lot of barriers to be overcome. Then, I'd say starting from 2006 to 2010, there was a lot of sharing of knowledge. There was a lot of scientific research about the existing systems. In Europe, we had a project called OBIS, which was comparing several cities. Then we had also the need to find suitable operational models. So back then, the main model was companies like Clear Channel, JCDecaux, so the big outdoor advertisement companies. They were always looking for innovative concepts to get the next exclusive outdoor advertisement contract in the city. So in the 1970s it was public toilets, in the 1980s it was the branded bus shelters, so in the 2000s it was bike sharing. So they gave away bike sharing free of charge to the city, and therefore they got the outdoor advertisement rights. Now this kind of model is still existing in some older contracts, so we have cities like Stockholm or Mexico City where this is still the case, but I haven't seen for the last 4 or 5 years any new projects in this kind of business model coming, because it became quite obvious that the money which is, the revenues which are lost by the city by giving away the outdoor advertisement rights at a discounted rate is actually higher than the money they would have paid for and subsidized for the bike sharing system. So this has become quite clear that JCDecaux made a very good deal with this. The next phase, so we've seen a maturing industry. In the last couple of years, there was a lot of learnings gained internationally, and also some new technologies applied, especially with the emergence of the smartphones and the app technologies. It has become much easier for people to register. Mobile payments are gaining in significance, of course, and also in terms of station technology, the stations have become much more flexible, solar powered, and with wireless technology. So this all helps to get acceptance and to make bike sharing more feasible. And also, I already mentioned that the traditional business model with the integration into the outdoor advertisement contracts has shifted towards new business models. So these days we see a more strategic alliance between public transport operators and authorities and bike sharing, as bike sharing is perceived more and more as a mode of public transport and as a complementary system towards it. So now we are in a phase where we need to explore added value. So what are the next big things in bike sharing? So a lot of people are talking about smart cities. What does bike sharing, or how does bike sharing support smart city initiatives? What kind of data can be gained by bike sharing to support the planning? How can this be commercialized to reduce subsidy levels? So all of these aspects are current questions in bike sharing, and I'm coming to some of them also in the due course of my presentation. So here's a slide about the evolution of our technology. So we started very simple, very cheap. As I mentioned, we didn't have the opportunity to get a lot of investments, and so it needed to be a little bit of pocket money from our founder. And so they developed basically the simple chain lock or combination lock technology with a simple bicycle. So you could send an SMS to a certain hotline number, and then you got the code to open it. So it was a very simple solution. The usage rate was tremendously low, because we didn't have the budgets for marketing, etc. But somehow with this very low-cost approach, we were able to survive the first years. The next years we developed, I think we were the first bike sharing operator to develop an application to be able to register, rent, return and manage your account. That was back in 2009. And then from 2011, based on the benchmarks given by the Barcelona, Lyon and Paris schemes, the demand for station-based systems started to increase. So the first public tenders in Germany also came in around this time, 2010, 2011. So we needed to develop a station system which also involves the RFID technology for access. And one of the main requirements for these German tenders was that you need to integrate with public transport. So we were using the smart card technology to open the bikes, and this card reader and the whole user interface was basically in the terminal. Or we had the terminal, you could go hold your card, enter your login data, and then you could rent a bike. In the meantime, over the years, we found that in some cities, station planning is or in every city basically. We've just seen from Rob here, I said that it takes 5 years to relocate from one corner or 6 months from one corner around to the other corner. And this is, I can assure you, you're not the only one facing these issues. So that's a common scenario anywhere in the world. Even in the system of Berlin launching today, we were assured by the Senate, so the highest council, that we can get 200 locations. At the moment we have permissions for 125. So because the local districts, then there are still a lot of people you need to talk to, and it takes time. So what we, but nevertheless, it was very, or the technology to integrate with public transport cards was a very helpful thing for us to create these alliances and to become a complementary mobility operator. So what we did was we took the technology from the terminal, put it into the board computer, which is on the bike, and we took the locking system, which was before in the docks, and also put it on the bike. So ultimately we have a full-scale electronically locked and trackable bicycle, or a system with a bicycle only. So that of course offers us completely new concepts to think about or to plan bike sharing. But I'm coming to this a little bit later. This kind of technology was implemented for the first time in Budapest, the capital of Hungary, into late 2014. And since then we have rolled out now about 10,000 of these pieces in Munich, in Cologne, and there are several UK cities in the US, now latest in Beirut, in Lebanon. So it's really catching up technology. Many people are also asking about electric bikes. We're coming to this in more detail in a later presentation, but so we have a few pilot projects, the first one launching in the Stuttgart region in 2015. And right now the latest innovation was the NFC technology, so that you can use your NFC-enabled smartphone to open the bike, and also wireless return detection, so which is included into the station sign you've seen out there. So basically the board computer is communicating to the station sign saying, hello, I'm here. It's helpful for the operators to control the system and to keep the bikes around the station.
Seb, could I just summarize for a second? So I think when Nextbike Germany started, they had what we might call analog bicycles.
Yes.
No technology at all on the bicycle. The technology was sitting, we can call it the cloud, right, back in 2004, but the technology was actually sitting in the cloud. You as a potential rider would access that technology by making a phone call, yeah? And then 2 or 3 years later, you would access the bikes by possibly using an app. Yeah? You then went into an iteration where you could access the bikes because there was some technology on the bicycles themselves, or actually, sorry, on the racks and the rental station. And we're now in this iteration where the technology is actually in the bike, not in the rack. So we've had this movement and evolution of the bicycle and where the enabling technology might sit. Is that a reasonable summary?
Yes, yes.
Yeah?
Okay. Are there any questions so far? Okay. So now basically we have two different concepts you can think about. First concept we call the classic bike system. So it's the typical system layout you know from Melbourne, you know from Brisbane, from London, from New York. Heavy infrastructure, the terminal station which has the main user interface. Here in most cases it also has a POS, a credit cards reader to accept your credit cards, and then the locking system in the docks. So yeah, this is basically in most of the systems at the moment in the world, this concept is the case. Now in many of those cities, the main disadvantage here is, I don't know, have any of you used one of these systems before? Where was that?
I used the La Rochelle one in Stockholm.
All right, okay. How about you? London, okay. So what happens if all the bikes or all the docks are full?
Then you go to the next dock.
Okay.
It's usually not that far away.
Okay, but which can be annoying if your train is coming in 3 minutes, you're arriving at Victoria.
You have to keep track just in case as you're riding.
Right, so the full capacity problem, that's one of the main issues, which also requires a lot of rebalancing, so a lot of human resources, and which drives up the operations cost. With our additional chain lock we have applied, we had a solution for this, but still this is the main flaw of this kind of system. On the contrary, we are what we call the smart bike system. So here the station design is much more streamlined. So the infrastructure is not that heavy. We have a signpost here. We have analog docks, how we call them here. So there's no electronics in the dock. They're just still made for purpose. So they're fitting only with our bicycles and avoid private bicycles to be parked here. So that can be a big issue if you have if you're using bicycle racks and you. Oh la la! Sorry, I think this is kind of dissolving now.
I should have paid for more glue tape.
Okay, so yeah. So basically, this allows the station to be used by bike sharing systems only. And I mentioned before, so this wireless return technology. So now, just assuming all the docks are full here, you still can lock the bike, park it next to it, lock it by itself, and confirm the return at the board computer here. So the bike stations can never be full, they can only be crowded. And before, in the docking system, like in London, you had, once you docked it, the return was confirmed through RFID in the dock. So now we have here a communication, an offline communication between the board computer and the smart sign, as we call it. So that we also know that the bicycle is in vicinity of the station.
But it only is a wireless connection.
It's a wireless connection.
So, like Seb says, actually, you could lock the bike to itself. You could even lock it to the 30 km/h speed sign, yeah, that is next to the bike station if all the racks were actually full.
Correct. So let me just open this again. So this fork lock system here, see, it's made for a smooth insertion here and the lock. So now we have different, I mentioned this before, we have different kind of concepts which are possible now. The first thing you can think about are what we call free-floating systems. So you have a geofenced service area where basically you can return the bike wherever you want. Just park it, lock it, and the GPS in the board computer here will notify the system, and the next user can use his smartphone to locate where the next bicycle is. We have some experience with these kind of schemes, so we have currently two systems with complete free floating. One is in Cologne. It launched in May 2015 with 1,450 bikes we have there in operations now, and 45 square kilometer service area. I'm coming to this project a little bit later with some more data, so I don't want to talk too much about it at the moment. And then our second project is in Karlsruhe, a city of about 350,000 inhabitants, probably pretty similar from the population size like Christchurch. We have 390 bikes in a 17.5 square kilometers area. So this is the last one, our second but last. Maybe we'll just pull them out all. Yeah. So then we'll have no issues anymore. So what are when we compare the free-floating system with a station-based system, whatever it's a classic bike system or a smart bike system, but let's say a station-based system. So there are of course a few advantages of this kind of free-floating system. So for the user, when you want to return the bike, it's great. You can just park it in front of your house door and that's it. So it's a true last mile solution. Also you have much lesser infrastructure costs, but then if we take a look at the station-based system, the advantages, there's a much longer list of advantages here. So first of all, if you're docking the bicycle, you still have a higher security. A free-floating bike you can just take and pull in the river, and that happens unfortunately. So don't underestimate the vandalism power and the criminal power of people. So that also means when the bikes are docked, they are much more resilient against any other external inputs like weather. A strong wind is coming, all the bikes are falling over. And that just doesn't give a good image to the city, doesn't give a good impression to the sponsor or the branding partner, and ultimately also not for the user when he needs to pick up the bike. Then station-based systems also provide much lesser service efforts to the service team. Just imagine you are going around to check the bikes and clean them, and you can service 10 bicycles at one station. It's much lesser efforts than if you need to visit every single bicycle across the city. Also from the user perspective, if there's a station around, you can be pretty sure there's a bike. Maybe in the rush hour you are unlucky that the last user has taken the last bike. That can happen. So there will never be 100% availability assurance like in public transport. So that's possibly a disadvantage of bike sharing. But in general you can be relatively sure that there is a bicycle at those stations. Also in the city it's important that as Julian mentioned, the finance, there needs to be some revenues coming from branding partners, and Spark was very generous in supporting the system here, so they also want to make sure that the appearance in the city looks good, and not just that the bikes are crisscrossing and located all over. And it also gives the city a much more structured city appearance. I don't know who has seen this picture here or similar pictures from Shanghai. So Shanghai has seen a tremendous growth of free-floating bike sharing. There are a couple of startups which have raised altogether $700 million within the last 12 months. And just Shanghai alone has grown up to a fleet of 600,000 shared rental bikes. It has come to a situation that people needed to shuffle them around to get space to their house. And of course that's a very extreme scenario, and I don't think this will ever be likely to happen in Christchurch. But it just can show you the extreme ramifications when we're thinking about a free-floating system. So here's another image. This is actually from Berlin. So it's not only us operating the bike sharing system there, so we have the service contract with the city, but we have also another player, the Deutsche Bahn, the German railway. They are using what they call virtual stations, so they have designated return areas where you can rent and return a bike. But then again, the wind comes or somebody's just playing domino, and then it looks like this. And this is, from my perspective at least, it's not the right way, or it doesn't give a good perception of bike sharing. So there are also other options with what you can do with a smart bike system. So what we call it a hybrid system. So maybe in the one or the other area you won't be able to find the permissions to install stations. Like we have in Germany, the city of Dresden is a UNESCO World Heritage Site in the inner ring. Maybe you've seen some pictures of this, or the one or the other has been there. So it's a very, very beautiful city, but no way to get any permissions to install stations. Otherwise, they would lose their UNESCO World Heritage Site status. So, but still, in this core center, we want to have make bike sharing available. So there, free floating is then on a smaller scale a pretty good alternative. But the remaining areas of the city, we are, wherever possible, we are installing stations. So That's overcoming certain barriers, but ultimately leading to a general structured approach here. So we have two systems in Germany with this kind of hybrid approach. Dresden I already mentioned, so we have a very small, I think 3.5 square kilometer radius in the inner city. So you see this here, that's the inner Old Town ring. And then 127 pretty small average stations for 500 bikes in total. The other project in Germany we have conceptualized as a hybrid system between free-floating and stations is the MVG project in Munich. So there our partner is the local public transport company MVG. It's a white label project, so the whole design is in MVG design. So they even designed their own bicycle. They're very picky. They have a lot of money to spend on design in Munich, so they designed this kind of station terminal here and a very unique design and a unique bicycle, and they conceptualized a 120 square kilometers area for free floating, plus 125 stations. So at every metro station there's a fixed station, because that's the location where the highest demand is expected, and they want to make sure that this is in good structure, and the rest from there then the users can bring the bikes wherever. Our operations team, they are facing quite some issues, especially in the park areas. So the Englischer Garden, the English Garden in Munich, it's huge and you cannot access it with service vehicles to rebalance. So there are quite some issues here with this concept, but technically it's feasible, just to give you options when you're conceptualizing your project here. So if I want to conclude on this topic, station designs and technology here, our conclusion is that we need to maximize the density of the system. I mentioned it before as an answer to your question, how can we generate most trips and make the system most attractive? Think about the Uber experience. You're coming out of your office, you push a button and wait for a car to come. You don't walk anywhere anymore, and you're just going towards your final destination. The similar experience we need to generate between bike sharing, public transport, so a seamless A to B, door-to-door connectivity. So hence, if your next station is 50 meters away around the corner, you will take a bike. If you need to walk 300, 400, 500 meters, that's not the best option anymore. So that's why station density is really key when you want to increase the numbers of trips. Then also, if you're thinking about some kind of free-floating area, just limit it to really either the core city center or maybe some closed campus area or some really controllable area. So don't think too big for this.
So Seb, sorry, you're saying that if you have 100 fixed stations, but your free-floating area would be a small subset within that?
For example, yes. Yeah. I mean, if that's something you want to go
if
for.
You want to go
yeah, and then finally, so there are, if you are thinking about hybrid systems of free-floating systems, no, particularly hybrid systems, we can think about also some kind of dynamic pricing to say, okay, if you return the bicycle outside of the station, you need to pay more. If you're bringing it to a station, you pay less. So that's also a mechanism how we can help rebalancing the system a bit more technology driven. But that's just then a new concept for us as well. We're also starting to apply this for Berlin for the first time, just to allow a bit more flexibility, although we have here already a very, very high dense station with 150, 200 meters average distance in the core center. You see here, like on every corner of the city there is already a station. So there are new ideas to mitigate the negative effects of this free-floating aspect, but yeah, it needs to be considered here. Are there any questions so far?
With the free floating, was that actually biker demand? Was that consumer demand who said, we don't want to walk to the station? We don't want to bike to the station and then walk to the destination?
Well, I mean, there's a high positive correlation between the density of stations and the numbers of trips. So there's the ITDP Bike Share Planning Guide from 2013, which gives a lot of empirical data. And if you radically think this further, the ultimate number of density is the free float. So having the bike sharing as a station by yourself, kind of. No? And from your own experience, like when you're cycling somewhere, you're not parking there and then walking 500 meters, but you're parking right at the end of your trip, at your final destination. So that's probably a learned habit by cyclists.
And Seb, have you got a comment on, it's worked well for you riding from where you picked the bike up and dropped it off, but the second rider that goes looking for the bicycle, you got a comment about that?
I mean, you need to have a smartphone, and your smartphone needs to have battery, so that's not always the case. So in order to locate the bike, or you need to be lucky to find something on the street. So that can also be a disadvantage of this kind of system. You know?
And given we're creatures of habit, you know, we like to go to the station nearest us and expect to find it.
Yeah.
I think the streetscape being, you know, marred would be a big barrier to most. Have cities have they reversed from that decision? The cities who are trying.
Well, this Shanghai thing here, the cities hadn't had any stake in this, so there were a couple of also some startups founded by some ex-Uber managers in China. They just started to roll out thousands of bicycles there every day, and now 600,000 are on the streets, and now just the Shanghai government has started to regulate them, to impose fines when they need to carry away. They've confiscated 5,000 bikes just in 1 week to make a statement. So.
As a bike share user though, I like to be able to park my bike out where I need to go and just lock it up. I would hate to think that that if we went to something like that someone would pick it up and grab it. I mean, I know you haven't ended your session, but I think there's because you know how, Rob, you said that we are normally going from the station when we pick it up to the station, and dropping it off at the station we picked it up, because a lot of us are working in the city, so we do use it for errands and things like that. So you leave your bike out here, you lock it around the spouting or whatever, and then you do your thing. So.
Which is fine if you keep it there for some minutes to have your coffee or do your errands, and then you bring it back to a station.
And you know, when I do that, I always think that's great profile for the bike. So I think there's an element of, you can have a hybrid, but not the hybrid that you're talking about, but the just functionality of using the bike.
I'll give you an example of that. So the system that we run in Auckland, we have similar challenges to Rob in terms of access to sensible locations that are easy for the public. So we have 2 stations on waterfront Auckland land, which, those of you that know Auckland, is pretty well served by people coming in on buses and trains. And obviously very high density in terms of people working. If you only made it a half an hour free trip for people, that's not really enough for them to go and get things done. So our recommendation to Waterfront Auckland, the agency that looks after it, was, look, how about you do a 2-hour free period? So what you've changed is the price in that 6-part model that I had up there. So the idea being that if it's a 2-hour free period, even though we've only got 2 stations, you can pick up a bike, ride 20 minutes to your meeting, have your meeting, and come back within the free period. So you've said, this is my target rider, this is how they're going to work it, and I've got a price to make it work. You can't afford to put 100 stations out there and 1,000 bikes.
I'd agree.
Yeah.
I just have a question around giving information around how the different systems you're talking about here impacts, say, male versus female users or riders, or young versus old. Like, what encourages or discourages users?
I mean, there's a general tendency across all bike sharing systems that the majority of users are male, so it's possibly between 60-40, 70-30. So quite a few system operators, they are active in engaging particularly with female cyclists to engage them to cycle more. I mean, what's the reason for it? Good question. There might be some studies who are focusing particularly on barriers for female cycling usage. Maybe it's if you need to take care about your kids, then you need to have a chariot or some child seats, which are not usually supplied by bike sharing companies. So that can be an issue, but we have now a first project in Warsaw. We started this in 2012 and just renewed the contract now. So since 2 months we have a new fleet of 4,600 bicycles, including 100 kids bikes. so 20-inch and 24-inch bicycles. And the challenge there, of course, is a liability issue. So because the kids are normally not making or signing the liability waiver or signing a contract with the operator, so it's their parents usually. So we don't want the kids to take the bike out by themselves, so they can just be rented on the account of a parent if another adult cycle is rented at the same time. So you make sure the kid is cycling with the parent. But we're trying to address these things. Also, we have 2 projects now in Germany with cargo bicycles. You must have seen, so where you can carry some of the kids or do your groceries, and there are some pilot projects, so small in scale, 50 bicycles in Konstanz in the south of Germany, 25 I think in a small city near Hamburg. But we're using this experience also to understand what are the particular mobility patterns when it comes to different kind of use cases. We are happy to share this with you when we have the first insights of this, but it's a very new field for us as well.
Question for me?
Yes.
Yeah, obviously there's lots of different reasons to do bike share, just trying to get different things out of it. And I mean, it's interesting, Brant was saying, probably going to come from walking or PT, so, from a transport perspective, first of all, this, okay, we're not talking about shifting people necessarily out of cars to this. So that idea of it being kind of a gateway drug for people to rediscover biking in general, whether they actually then go on to take more transport trips on their own bike later, is there any data that supports that? So that sort of shows bike shares contributed to an overall mode shift, even if it doesn't itself, come driven from replacing car trips?
I know that particularly in Barcelona there has been quite some research done on this particular topic, and so in general you see of course mode share or shift of modes in before implementing a system and after implementing the system, although we need to be careful of course to create monocausalities. So there are different like general trends of cycling and so on, and or parking management and pricing. So it's not only the bike sharing which contributes to it, but for example in Barcelona the bike sharing operators, they have conducted a user survey among their users, and I don't have the figures now exactly, but there was a pretty high number, something like 30-40% of the users of the B-Sync system who said that they're not only cycling much more often than they did before, but they also bought their own bicycle for so they reactivated their cycling through that.
Question. You mentioned really briefly about fleet management.
Mm-hmm.
So, are there any patterns you've seen around different cities around the fleet management of when you have to return bikes to certain stations, when there's a glut in a certain spot?
Like every city has very different usage patterns, of course. So you have systems which have a very high amplitude in the morning and in the afternoon, so they are typical commuter-driven systems. And especially if you look at stations like Waterloo Station, Victoria Station in London, when all the commuters they're coming, or the inbound commuters they are reaching at Victoria, then within 20 minutes, 10 minutes, the station is empty. So the operator is forced to bring bikes all the time. There are challenges, of course, especially during rush hour. I mean, the service car is also stuck in traffic. You cannot use a helicopter to move bikes around. So there are limitations to this. And although there are a lot of different advantages bike sharing can deliver, we need to say that bike sharing is not a mode for mass transit. So let's say even on good days, where with the 10,000 bicycles in London, they have about 50-60,000 trips. But just compare this to the trips of the Tube, which is 1.5-2 million people a day. So it's a complementary system to this, but this rebalancing, there are limitations to this. Although, of course, in a service level regime, you're trying to understand, of course, your traffic flows and trying to adopt to it and modify it. So right now, because the rebalancing is also the biggest price or the cost driver. It can take up to 30, 40, 50% even of the total operating cost if you take a really serious rebalancing action. So there are initiatives like predictive balancing, for example, that's based on this data the system is generating, that you can make better and better prediction on at what time, in which weather conditions, which station has a likelihood of 95% to run empty within the next 30 minutes, something like this. So we are also exploring some of these ideas. We've developed a little algorithm which we're testing at the moment to understand whether this helps us. It's a bit complicated matter because there are a lot of external factors coming in. Let's say a station is closing or needs to be relocated for construction sites, suddenly the complete pattern of the system can change. Yeah, but so this is one of the main issues of bike sharing in general, the rebalancing.
Can we have one more question and then we'll move on to the next one?
So I'm just wondering if there's any examples where they link to on-street car parking facilities.
Sorry.
Where you lock your bike to an on-street car parking facility, you're at the station, you can buy car parking through.
I'm not aware of this.
Do you sort of park and ride? Or?
No, I mean, rather than build a separate bike station, you could actually lock it to the existing car park.
Oh, I'm with you. The piece of street furniture that you put your 50 cents into.
They've got electricity there, they've got all the technology. So.
I mean, we don't need electricity for the bikes and also for the station, so that's not a requirement. And I mean, do we want 10 bikes to be locked to these car parks? Does this give a nice...
I was just thinking every 50 metres across you, at least there's one of those stations, so you could put 2 on each one.
Well, maybe an idea. Okay. Yeah, well, I mean, that's up to you to explore how the station network could look like, no? Why not?
I think that's certainly one of the, it's certainly a consideration. I mean, I've talked about the wider location where your bikes would go, but there's the finer grain implications of location in terms of exactly where on the street are we going to be putting this rack of 4 or 5 bicycles, or this rental station of 4 or 5 bicycles. And maybe there needs to be some creative solution.
You've got to be careful about accessibility for other users.
Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think so.
Absolutely.
Not every footpath has enough space for that. Could we move on to the next section about public transport card integration? Would that be okay?
Right. So I mentioned already in the beginning that there has been a shift of the business model and the alliances from the outdoor advertisement contracts up to a more collaborative approach with public transport operators and bike sharing operators. And this here is a picture from the multimodal mobility hub in Munich called Münchner Freiheit. So here we have the electric cars, the electric charging units, shared cars and bike sharing and tram and buses. So all the modes integrated into one location. So that's a quite modern concept at the moment across many European cities. And bike sharing plays, of course, a significant role. So with our 6 years now working with a couple of German public transport authorities and operators, we have developed an approach based on 4 columns to work with public transport operators. We call it the STIM approach, to stimulate multimodal mobility behavior, and the S stands for the system integration. So Rob has explained already that we have integrated the accessibility and also the user verification with the Metro card here, so that you can rent the bike with this card. There are also another concept is based on the so-called mobility as a service platforms, which incorporates or which includes different modes of transport via API data, so that you just have one app. Basically, Google Maps or Google Transit is the best example for this. You have one app, you see public transport data, you see car sharing data, bike sharing data, and can say, I want to go from A to B, tell me the best route, and here's your ticket. So these 2 directions are important here. Then we can, of course, integrate the tariff system that if you are a public transport user, you get benefits and discounted rates, which also helps to make the general public transport offer to the users more attractive. Then the I stands for infrastructure integration. Of course, if you want to serve the first and last mile, you want to make sure that there is a bike sharing station in close vicinity to your public transport hub or to your bus stops. And last but not least, if you're doing all these good things, of course, it needs to be talked about. So the marketing is a very important thing. And typically, if you as a public transport operator, you're trying to sell job tickets or tickets to the university students. I don't know, do you have some kind of a bulk ticket option for and good discounts here? From
Yeah, kind of.
kind of
Well,
needs to be better, it seems. But okay, so
it's possible.
yeah. So obviously then we would talk to the same people. We would also try to work with you to give you a good offer, and why can we not use the synergies and integrate also these marketing activities to create a multimodal and cross-media marketing campaign. So I mentioned already the KVB Rat in Cologne. We consider this, although or despite the issues we have with the free-floating concept from an operational perspective, we still consider this a benchmark when it comes to public transport integration, because we have applied this approach here very successfully. So our partner, the KVB, the Cologne Public Transport Company, they are our branding partner here, and we've also integrated the KVB e-ticket, so the public transport smart card, to allow all these 600,000 card holders a very seamless onboarding process. So you tap your card, you're entering your mobile phone number, you get a PIN, off you go, 30 minutes free of charge. So this means that, I'll show you some data, that actually 90%, so all of these here, so the job ticket, the student ticket, the monthly membership, the monthly passes, and the other regional transport ticket holders, so 90% of all the trips being made are by public transport users. So that clearly shows that there is a strong synergy here. Also, if you compare the duration of trips between the public transport users, the blue ones, and the white ones, which are not the public transport users, so the rest of the 10%, so you see clearly that the trip duration is much shorter on average. And instead of substituting a train or bus trip, you are complementing it by the last mile option. Currently we have about 47, or end of the year 2016, we had 47,000 registered members. So that's about, what was it, 5% of the total population of Cologne, a little bit less. And this is basically a target we want to achieve in every city. Within 2 years, 5%, that's a really strong success here.
And sorry, Seb, how many rides have you had in that area, did you say?
Oh, I didn't say that, sorry. So we had about 1 million trips logged until end of 2016. We started with about 500 bikes in May, and then we added up a few more. So the full size of 1,450 bikes was reached beginning of 2016. So 1 million trips, that translates to about 2.5 trips a day at the moment. And we've seen already an increase in 2017 of more than 50%. So it's we're expecting about 3.5, 3.8 trips per bike per day on average this year.
90% of those trips were done
by public transport card holder.
Tapping your public transport card on the back?
Well, by users who have a public transport card.
Okay.
Whether they use the app or use the card, that's a secondary thing.
Okay.
But they are public transport subscribers
All right.
and users.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And sorry, I'll ask one more question about
Sure.
that. If you have 5% of the total population that are registered as users, what's the penetration for the transport card? Do you know?
So we have 600,000 public transport cards in circulation, but in the whole region. So not only
in that region.
So in Cologne, it will be possibly like 400,000 out of 1 million people. So about 40% of all these people there have a card already in their pocket. So there's a pretty high penetration
so
here.
Achieving 10% penetration on the number of people that have a transport card.
Yes.
That's it.
Yes.
5%.
Right. So here we see a couple of visualizations from all the data we are generating, anonymous of course. So this data can help a lot for urban planning processes or for other smart city applications, and we're happy to share this data with our partners KVB here in Cologne. So here we see all the trips being made from the origin destination. So we see that there's a coverage across the whole city. And let me see if I can play this. Is this? Oh, no.
Yep.
Yeah? Oh. No, that shouldn't. It should look different. Oh, that looks strange. Okay. Should just. Okay, maybe there's a problem with my file here. So actually, this video shall show the movement of the bicycles over a 24 hours period. So you can track how the bicycles are flowing, and of course when you are looking to allocate investments into the cycling infrastructure, it would be great to identify people making a detour because there's an issue when they go straight, so that gives you a clear indication here. No?
Is that because you've got sensors on the bikes or because they're smart bikes? Or because they're metric patterns?
Yes, so here's a GPS inside the board computer. And we have also some algorithms, so some origin destination algorithm based on GPS. So we're not constantly every 5 seconds also pinging, but on a regular basis, like every 1, 2, 3 minutes, and so that we can kind of modify.
So the
algorithm.
GPS is quite power hungry from electricity, and the battery is only of a certain size for the board computer. So like Seb says, if it's sending a GPS signal
every second, that would be an issue.
Yeah,
You know, from your mobile phone, it's draining a lot if you're activating the GPS all the time. But it's good enough to get a very sensible data set here. So then, of course, bike sharing is ticking a lot of boxes when it comes to sponsorship engagement. So, like Spark, the branding partner here, they can benefit from various positive attributes the bike sharing is conveying. So, of course, it offers a lot of community value if you're actively using bike sharing as a vehicle to engage with your local community. The technology, the innovation, of course, is very appealing to sponsors. Then you need to work very actively with local businesses and local partners. So also there, a branding partner has the accessibility there, and of course, a few different values bike sharing, or we as a company are holding very high. So of course something like fair treatment of customers, or that we are trying to improve the cities. So things like that have become very appealing to sponsors. And here's a picture, for example, from Milton Keynes, the garden city in the UK. Santander is a Spanish bank who is operating in UK for a couple of years. So they're also sponsoring the London scheme, Santander Cycles. So this is called Santander Cycles NK. It launched last year in 2016, and we are very happy with this relationship. Right now we are doing some crowdfunding among some universities in the UK, where Santander has accepted to sponsor a few more schemes. So we are engaging with local universities, and it's a very positive thing. So at the end of my presentation, I would like to give you a very rough and so a very rough overview about the business model, or about the revenues and the cost structure. So just to get into the hard facts here as well. So typically, and there are a lot of variations here, of course, but typically you can assume as a starting point for your calculations around $900 to $1,200 US for the operation of a bike sharing system. Of course, there are a lot of local factors, and there are a lot of influencing instruments. Let's say the service level agreement between the operator and the city. If you need to spend a lot into rebalancing, and if the rebalancing intervals are pretty tight, then of course the costs drive up. If you say, okay, it's not the end of the world if a station is empty for half an hour or for 2 hours during non-peak time, then you can bring it down, of course. So that's really the question: what kind of service level do you want to have? The higher and the tighter the service level, of course, the higher also the volumes can get, but it will be more costly. So typically, the operations and maintenance of the system require the bulk of the cost, so plus minus 40%. Then overhead, marketing, sales costs, you could say about 30%, and the depreciation of the capital investment about 20%, and other material costs like spare parts, etc., about 10%. On the revenue side, as I mentioned, it's getting more and more appealing to sponsors to become associated with bike sharing. Usually they're not able to cover the whole cost, and they are not willing to. They're not milking cows, so we need to also keep the expectations a little bit low that it can be a 100% sponsored system. But they can possibly play a role about 50% or so and support the scheme, while the other fundings are coming from subscriptions and individual usage fees. Here I must say a bike sharing system can possibly become operationally profitable if you are limiting it, for example, to a certain very high value and high density downtown area. Let's say like the Milton Keynes project, for example, the sponsorship was really great, but you need to find those opportunities, and they're not everywhere in the world, so they're not falling from the trees. So there are a few cities in the world which are running without public subsidies, but then it's difficult to implement. So I don't want to raise the expectation here that it can be a feasible system. I just say it can happen here and there.
I guess to go to a public transport analogy, I'm sorry, I don't know Christchurch well enough, but there will be certain routes from the city centre out through certain suburbs to a certain point where buses could run 4 or 5 times an hour for 7 days a week, and that one route would be profitable on the basis of the fares that were. But if you've got to go beyond that to the next suburb, it becomes less profitable and actually starts to lose money. If you want to go to some of these other suburbs, then you wouldn't go there from a just pure commercial point of view. So, like I said, it says very dense central city with a very generous sponsor. Yeah, maybe you've got an arrangement there that will work. But if you don't have that, for example.
Yeah, but the more socially inclusive you want to grow, and of course this is a main objective for public transport services, of course, and general politics. So the less likely it gets to become profitable. So these are the points I just mentioned before. So typical sponsorship rates in the US, in the UK, for example, are between $700 and $1,000 per bike per year. In Germany, we have issues with this, so the German sponsorship market is completely different. Every sponsorship is going into FC Bayern Munich, so there's not much left there. But so every market is different. We need to accept that now. So I cannot really, I don't know how this can work out here. So last but not least, my final slide. So how can the city support a bike sharing scheme? So either thinking about a one-time capital contribution or a viable gap funding, or maybe even this viable gap funding can be shifted towards some kind of a purchase of memberships, which then can be disseminated about among the municipal employees or among the socially less benefited or less or the low-income groups, let's say. But what is very essential, the infrastructure shall be improved further, so whatever is put into the good cycling infrastructure directly benefits to the success of the system, and also provides the space for the locations. And here, I mentioned before, Rob also knows it by experience, it's very important to have a good process to enable the operator to move ahead quickly and install the stations, and make sure that this planning process is very closely and very constructive.